You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Okay, so Glenn, we've all obviously seen the news about Samuel Alito, the Supreme Court justice, who had a flag outside of his house that was flying upside down, which of course symbolized Stop the Steal. I guess the first question here, so as not to bury the lead, how can a judge whose wife was willing to align herself with the insurrectionists after January 6th, not even before the insurrection, but after, simultaneously rule on a question of presidential immunity and not have to recuse himself?
Justice Alito, just like Justice Clarence Thomas, must recuse from all cases involving the January 6th insurrection, plain and simple. If the Supreme Court is to begin clawing back some of its legitimacy, those two men, for openers, should absolutely remove themselves. They are disqualified based on their conduct. You know, I'm sure our viewers have seen Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who has been saying for a very long time the Supreme Court has been captured by right-wing extremists, captured by Republican billionaires. And, you know, Justice Samuel Alito literally raised a flag proving Senator Whitehouse to be right. Outside his house in Alexandria, Virginia, I believe the photograph that was taken and run, the news broke in the New York Times, said that on January 17th, not long after January 6th, they were displaying a flag outside Justice Alito's house with the American flag upside down. That is precisely what we saw at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Trump supporters, insurrectionists, holding the American flag upside down. Justice Alito made the decision to throw his lot in with the insurrectionists. That disqualifies him from presiding over cases involving the insurrection, including, perhaps most importantly, whether Donald Trump, who incited the insurrection, should be absolutely immune from prosecution, whether we want to elevate a president to a king. So I think legal, ethics experts will be pretty much uniform, if not unanimous, in coming out, and they have been coming out ever since that New York Times report, coming out saying, listen, if the Supreme Court is to retain any legitimacy, Thomas and Alito need to remove themselves from the case, because that's what the federal law provides for anybody scoring at home. They can crack the big, ugly blue book of federal laws, the United States Code. Look at 28 United States Code, section 455. It says a justice, not just a judge, not just a magistrate, a justice must remove themselves from the case if their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. By Alito sailing that flag over his home in the aftermath of January 6th, in obvious solidarity with the insurrection and the insurrectionists, he must recuse.
Now, that raises the obvious question, though. Who litigates that claim? Because Justice Alito is on the highest court in the land. So where do we go above the Supreme Court?
Nobody, unfortunately, in our constitutional construct has the ability or the authority to, as you put it, Brian, litigate that claim. But at some point, Congress has to open impeachment inquiries. We can't continue to let Supreme Court justices take in-kind contributions from Republican billionaire donors who then have business before the court. We can't let Supreme Court justices sit on cases where their wives might have some criminal exposure for participating in the insurrection, as Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny Thomas, may have. We can't just sit back and slouch toward the end of our republic. Congress has to open impeachment hearings to see if these justices need to be removed if they're not going to abide by the federal law that requires recusal. Similarly, the executive branch, the Department of Justice, should open criminal investigations into, among other things, Justice Thomas and Justice Alito's failure to comply with federal financial disclosure laws. There's every reason in the world for the other branches of government to act, both the legislative and the executive branch, to hold accountable runaway judges and justices. But thus far, Brian, we haven't seen anybody do it. That's got to change if we want to keep our republic.
Well, I don't know if we really have enough of a predicate to open an impeachment inquiry, given that we haven't seen anything really serious, like a family member helping another family member buy a truck or anything like that for a car loan. So that's usually the stuff that we save, that we reserve the impeachment inquiries for. Some of the just the really, really serious stuff in government. Glenn, I follow a Democratic staffer on Twitter, and his name is Aaron Fritcher, and he made an excellent point. So Justice Alito says that his wife, Martha Ann Alito, had an altercation with a neighbor. This was her justification for doing so. Had an altercation with a neighbor about a "fuck Trump" sign that was within 50 feet of where kids purportedly waited for the school bus in January of 2021. He pointed out that the school districts were all remote in January of 2021, so no kids were actually waiting for buses. So the whole excuse here was predicated on a complete lie. Can I have your reaction to that?
Yeah, so I would say I chuckled at, but there was nothing funny about the statement that Justice Alito, who I'm trying very hard not to refer to as Sammy the Bull Alito, but I think I just did. Justice Alito gave a statement to the New York Times when it told him they were going to run the article about his upside-down flag in support of the insurrection. And the statement he gave them was, he said, oh, I didn't fly that flag personally. Yeah, it was flying upside down at my house. But, my wife did it because she was in a disagreement or a dispute, or she was offended by a yard sign that was put up, on our neighbor's lawn. So, of course,
who among us doesn't put the American flag into stress when they're having a dispute with a neighbor? Who among us?
That's exactly what I do. I start supporting the insurrection because I'm in a disagreement with my neighbor. Maybe they didn't return my lawnmower. So it was so laughable. And I have to tell you, anytime one of these, big, strong justices blame their wife for what appears to be their own misconduct, it's laughable, it's unseemly, and again, it should be investigated. That's why we have congressional inquiries, and that's why we have an FBI and a Department of Justice.
Now, we have seen Senator Dick Durbin come out and call on Justice Alito to recuse himself. That and $5 is going to get you a footlong at Subway. Like, what really needs to happen? What actionable steps can Democrats take in Congress, in the House or the Senate, to actually effectuate some type of change here, if not at least initial investigative steps?
Brian, short of a criminal investigation, if there is what's called adequate predication, that's a fancy term that DOJ uses for enough evidence, and the bar for opening a criminal investigation is very low. It's just if a crime might have been committed, or might be in the process of being committed, or might be committed in the future, like somebody's maybe conspiring to commit a crime, DOJ has the authority to open a criminal investigation. Of course, Congress can open investigative inquiries into judges and justices. That's what needs to be done, because we have all seen Congress try to urge the Supreme Court to, for example, adopt some ethical rules that are binding on the justices. And what did we get? We got a pamphlet of suggestions from the Supreme Court saying Supreme Court justices shouldn't do things that are unethical. I'm not taking much by the way of liberties with the language of that pamphlet. It really reads more like a Saturday Night Live skit. Nothing mandatory in it. They should be ethical. No enforcement mechanism. No provision to investigate unethical conduct by justices. It's laughable. So at this point, at some point, you got to go hard. You've got to use the tools that the Constitution gives you. Congress can investigate, DOJ can investigate, and if there's no there, they're fine. But let's investigate to see if there's a case that can and should be built.
And Glenn, let's finish off with this. Obviously, this calls into question the rationale for why they've taken up this whole question of presidential immunity in the first place. Do you think this shines a little bit more light on not only why they took it up, which is, you mentioned before that this is basically deciding whether or not America is going to have a king. That's bad enough on its face, but then the fact that they handed Donald Trump the delay that he was seeking in waiting so long to hear it, and now waiting even longer to actually hand down a ruling on it.
And 2 of the 9 justices, Alito and Thomas, have now been exposed as throwing in their lot with the insurrectionists. Do we really think we're going to get a fair shake out of the pending legal issue from the Alitos and the Thomases of the Supreme Court when the issue couldn't be more consequential for the health, indeed the viability of our democracy? Can a president commit all the crimes he wants against the people of the United States and not be held accountable, not be prosecuted for it? That is a recipe literally for the end of our democracy. Frankly, if they rule that way, Joe Biden does not have to relinquish power come January 20th, even if he loses the election, because it will be giving, the Supreme Court will be giving him its stamp of approval to do what Donald Trump did on January 6, 2021, to try to retain the power of the presidency, even though he lost the election. So now that it feels like, the prospects are growing dimmer, given that 2 of the 9 justices have exposed themselves as basically pro-insurrection, that we're going to get a legitimate opinion out of the Supreme Court that will allow the federal prosecution against Donald Trump in D.C. to move forward hopefully before the November election.
And I would just note, just before we end this, that when we have videos like this where we talk about people at the highest ranks of power, like members of the U.S. Supreme Court who are in the majority, who feel like they're untouchable, the point of this isn't to make you despair and to say, like, it's all over, there's nothing we can do, we're just going to throw our hands up and go home. The point is to let moments like this inspire you to make sure that Democrats take full control so that we can do something about this. Because absolutely.
Because let's do a quick call to action. There's something we can all concretely do right now regarding this demand that Alito and Thomas remove themselves. They comply with the federal law. Everybody go to uscourts.gov, www.uscourts.gov. You will find a judicial misconduct complaint form that anybody can fill out and submit. And all it is an opportunity for the public to submit a complaint form that says, listen, the federal law, 28 U.S. Code 455, says a justice must remove himself from a case if his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Alito's and Thomas's impartiality absolutely is open to question. Therefore, I'm going to file this 1.5 page. It's short, it's easy to fill out, it's intuitive, and the instructions are right there on uscourts.gov. File it, submit it. A whole bunch of us just did that for Aileen Cannon down in Florida. That's one way we can directly make our voice heard on these most consequential issues.
And I'll put the link in the post description of this video so that you can find it easily. I'll also put it on the screen of this video, on the end screen that's coming up in just a second. So with that said, of course, to stay on top of this, please make sure to follow both of our channels. The links are right here on the screen, along with, again, that link that Glenn was just referring to. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.